Hi guys, I hope you are doing well. So let's continue our SQL series, and today we will be discuss about SQL constraint. So guys, a constraint is a very important part in SQL Server, and constraint are nothing. These are specific rules, and those rules are defined on a particular column. Okay, so for an example, let's say if I'm talking about, let's say you have a age column, right? So each column cannot be a negative. Okay, so for an example, if user is inserting the data for a age column and by mistakenly they enter like -19, so your constraint will catch that information. Okay, and that will give you the sensible message or sensible information because you are entering invalid data. Similarly, let's say employee ID, right? The same employee ID we cannot have of a multiple people or multiple employee. Similarly, your salary also cannot be a negative. Okay, so if you want to define some certain rules on a particular column, right? So how you can define it? So you can define it with the help of SQL constraint. All right, so more specifically in the database, right, it will ensure the data integrity by enforcing a specific condition on a table values. Okay, so we will be discuss the SQL constraint in today's session as well and in upcoming session as well. And for your information, in SQL we have multiple type of constraint like a primary key constraint, foreign key constraint, check constraint, right? Not null constraint, unique key constraint, okay, and the default constraint. Okay, so these are the constraints are available in SQL for a specific purpose. Okay, so I hope you understood what is the meaning of constraint. Okay, or in simple way you can say that if you are defining the constraint, it means you are going to define a valid data. Okay, so nobody can insert the invalid data when you have defined the constraint on a particular column. All right, so guys, I will explain the primary key and composite key in detail with easy to understand examples. So first, what is the primary key? So here the primary key is nothing. This is the unique identifier. Okay, so guys, when you are going to define the primary key, right, so you need to understand what are the rules are associated with primary key. So first of all, unique, right? You cannot have the duplicate data for a primary key column. Okay, so here more than one rows cannot have the same primary key value. All right, and the second rule, which is not null. Okay, primary key does not allow the null value in a particular column, and we can have only single primary key on a particular table. Okay, so let's take an example. So for an example, if you are saying this is the employee ID, okay, so if I'm going to define this primary key column, let's suppose this is the employee ID is the primary key column. Okay, so I cannot insert one more time 101. This is invalid. Okay, similarly I cannot insert the null, right? And if you have defined already this is the employee ID as a primary key column, which means in that table you cannot define another column as a primary key column. Okay, I hope you understood, right? And similarly, so I am giving you some examples in order to understand the primary key. So if you are going to define the employee ID, right, it should be unique. Student ID is also unique. And similarly, the social security number, PAN number, right, license plate for cars, mobile number, and the product barcode. Okay, so these are the examples where you can think, yes, we can define these particular column, the primary key if needed. Okay, so let's understand how we can create the primary key, how we can drop the primary key, and how we can alter the primary key, right? So guys, here I want to create a simple table. Okay, so simple, let's say create table and student. So in the student table, what I am doing, I am going to define a student ID. Okay, and this should be int and primary key. Okay, so this is my primary key. In this particular column, I cannot define the duplicate. I cannot insert the null value. Okay, similarly, let me define some other column, which is student name as a varchar, and I can store up to 50 character, and age is integer. Right now on age, I'm not going to define any constraint because we are discussing about the primary key. And similarly, email and this is also varchar, and up to 100 character I can store. Simple. Okay, so here let me run this statement. Okay, so guys, I have run this successfully, this particular query. Now let me refresh this explore database. So here you can see I have a student table. Okay, and these are the columns I have created, right? Okay, and in the constraint, right, you will notice I have created a primary key. Interesting. And what if when I'm going to insert the data here? Okay, so let me insert the data, right, to check this. So what I'm doing here, insert into student, and here the values, let's say 1, and the name I am going to define here. Okay, and this is the age, and any synthetic email I am going to define. Okay, and similarly I am going to create a multiple record. Okay guys, now let me insert this particular statement. Okay, so this is inserted successfully, and this is also, and now for this. Okay, now let me show you the record. So simple select start from student, right? Now you can see this record. Okay, now when I read this data, right, so you can see I have a unique student ID and I'm not supplying any null. Okay, now what if when I'm going to insert the data for the same employee ID? Okay, although let's say I am going to change the name and their age, okay, and similarly their email, right? So here this particular statement will fail, right? Because we have already inserted the data for employee ID 3, and once again we are trying to insert the data for the same employee ID, right, which is wrong. So you can see we found a duplicate entry for this primary key in a student table. Okay, this is wrong. Similarly, you cannot define a null, right? So here, let's say if you are going to define the null, so this will also not work. You can see, right? So student ID cannot be a null because you are violating the law of primary key. Interesting. And remember one thing, what if when I'm going to insert the blank, okay, or maybe any missing value or maybe any empty value? Okay, example, let's say I am going to create another table for an example student 1, and here I want student ID only. Okay, student ID, and this is the varchar and 10 and primary key, just an example. Okay, so when I am going to execute this, and now I want to insert the data for this primary key only. Okay, so simple student 1, and the values I want, let's say blank. So this will be accepted by this table. Answer is yes, it will be accepted. Okay, similarly, let's say if I going to for this, yes, this will also accept it. And what if when I'm going to define null? Yes, this will also accept it. Okay, but as I just mentioned, if you are going to define like this, it will not be accepted. You can see. Interesting. So I hope you understood. We cannot define the duplicate value and we cannot define the null. Okay, but yes, we can define the string null or blank or maybe nothing in the primary key. All right. And guys, let's say how you can define the primary key separately. Example, let's say if I am using here create table product, right? And in the product, let's say what I am doing, first of all, I am going to define the product ID as an integer and the product name as a varchar. Okay, maybe anything simple. I'm not defining more column. And now I want to set product ID. It should be product ID as a primary key. So how we can do that? So simple primary key, and in the bracket you can define that particular column. Okay, so here I am going to define the primary key. Here we go. Simple. So when I will be refresh this particular database, and here you will be notice in the product, I have a single column as a primary key column, and you can see here primary key. Okay. Now the question is, let's say how to remove the primary key. Okay. So for an example, let's say you want to remove this primary key. So there is a couple of ways. You can right click here and you can delete. Okay. And using the query you want, so simple alter table name is a product, and you can drop the primary key. Simple. Now let me execute this. Okay, so once I refresh, primary key has gone. We do not have any primary key right now. Similarly, how you can set the primary key. So simple alter table product. I want to add a primary key on product ID column. Simple. Interesting, right? Now once I refresh this, and you will notice we have created a primary key. Okay. And guys, sometime we need to define a primary key name as well. Okay. So as I just mentioned, we are talking about the constraint. Okay. So as a constraint, you want to define a name of the primary key, right? So let's say set the primary key name, or you can say that constraint name. So simple alter table name is this. I want to add what? Constraint. Okay, you can define the constraint name, any sensible name. Let's say on the product, for an example name, just an example. Okay, or maybe product ID, whatever you want, you can define it. Okay, so let's say product ID, just an example. Okay, or you can say that the name as well, and the primary key, the column name is product ID. Okay, so when I'm going to run this, let me refresh here. Okay, so this is my product table. Okay guys, so that's how you can define the constraint name of a primary key. Interesting. All right, so I hope you understood how we can define the primary key constraint on a particular table. And now what if I am adding more than one primary key? Okay, so look at this. Let's say alter table, the same table, I want to add a constraint. Okay, or directly I can say that add primary key on a product. The second column name is a product name, let's say. Okay, now let me run this. Okay, so multiple primary key defined, and this is raising an error. Okay, so it is not possible we can define the multiple primary key column on a single table. Okay, interesting. And guys, now the next topic is, what do you mean by the composite key? Okay, so composite key is nothing, right? This is also a primary key. Sometimes few people are confused. So here a composite key is a primary key, right? That is made up of two or more column. Okay, so for an example, you are reviewing your table and you are thinking, yes, based on a single column, I cannot define the primary key. Okay, because in the existing data you found some duplicate element, or maybe your business is saying no, we cannot remove these duplicate value, and now we need to create a primary key. So you need to think, you need to take a more than one column. Okay, you can say that two or more column, and when you are going to combine those column and you are thinking, yes, now I found a unique item, so based on those column you can create a primary key. Okay, so we are calling as a composite key. So here the combination of all these columns must be unique, as I just mentioned. Individual column can have duplicate values, but the combination cannot have the duplicate value. Okay, so this is the basic example. Let's say if you are creating an enrollment table, so a student can enroll in a multiple courses, that's fine. A course can have multiple student, but a student can only enroll once in the same course. You got it? So I hope you understood what is the meaning of composite key. Okay, now let me give you an example to understand in the SQL. Okay, so what I'm doing here, so let's say I am going to create a table. Okay, let's say enrollment. Okay, and now let's say if I want student ID, okay, as a int, and course ID as a int, and let's say enrollment date as a date, or maybe some grade are associated as a 2. And now I want to decide a primary key. As I just mentioned, student ID can be duplicate because a same student can enroll in multiple courses. Okay, similarly course ID also can be duplicate, but the combination of student ID and the course ID cannot be duplicate. Okay, so this is what this is, guys, our composite key of a 2 column. Okay, actually this is the primary key, right? But we are calling as a composite key. When someone is saying composite key, it means more than one column are associated to create a primary key or composite key. Interesting. Now let me run this. Okay, let me provide the comma here, and now let me run this. Interesting. Okay, so if you are going to insert the data in the enrollment table, okay, so let's say if you have a one course ID, maybe 101, or maybe you are going to define any date here, so 0101, that's fine, or maybe the grade is, let's say, A plus, just an example. Okay, so this is particular fine. Okay, let me write here the values. This is absolutely fine. Simple. Now the same line of a statement you are going to run again. Okay, now again you are writing 1 and for the same course, right? So your SQL server will catch you. Okay, this is the duplicate entry. Although you can write this student ID once again, but the course name should be different, 102. Now this is absolutely fine. Simple. Okay, so when I'm going to display the data from this table, okay, so you will notice we have a unique data, the combination of student ID and the course ID. Interesting. Okay, similarly, if you are going to create more than 3 columns, so you can put comma here and you can supply another column if needed. Okay, so I hope you understood the primary key concept and the composite key concept. And once again, let me tell you, we cannot have the duplicate value, we cannot have null value, and you can apply only single primary key column on a table. Okay, all right. And once again, you can review this information. So primary key, like your social security number, it has to be unique to you only. Composite key, okay, combination of more than one column. Example, let's say street address plus apartment number. Okay, so multiple people can live on the same street. Similarly, multiple apartments can have the same number, right? But the combination is unique of your specific apartment, right? So what happened, as I just mentioned, once you break these rules, so this database will reject your data, right? So if you are trying to insert the duplicate primary key, insert null value in the primary key column, and similarly insert duplicate composite key combination. Okay, so guys, this kind of protection help maintain data integrity and prevent messy and duplicate record in your table. Okay, so I hope you understood why the primary key and composite key very important SQL key constraint in the SQL server. Okay, so guys, please practice of this particular session, and if you have any query and any suggestion, please let me know in the comment box. And for now, thanks for watching and have a great day.